Hey everybody, welcome to today's Substack Live with me, Dave Keating, coming at you live from Barcelona, and Julien.
And hi guys, I'm Julien Roez, editor of the French Dispatch, coming to you from sunny Brussels.
It was sunny until recently, actually.
I mean, it could
I
be
feel like
worse.
Brussels is back to normal weather at least, and
Yeah,
we really needed the rain. So,
we really
I
needed
mean,
the rain.
you really needed the rain. I'm here in Barcelona.
Listen,
I can say it's very good because I'm not there. So we thought we'd do another one of these end of week wrap ups. It's been another eventful week. I kind of we framed this as the blockages because I was trying to find a thread between the things that happened in the week, and there were three kind of interesting blockages this week that we could talk about. But maybe we could start off talking about this on again, off again tariff news. Again, we had new developments with this overnight, our overnight time for Europe. And that, of course, was the court ruling in the US that said Trump's across the board tariffs are not legal. Specifically, what the court was ruling on is that the justification for it is not legal, using this obscure clause from a law from the 1970s that's never been used before, saying that you could do these across the board blanket tariffs in a national emergency. Basically, the court said there is no national emergency. You can't use this. But the tariffs on aluminium, cars, steel will still be in effect, those 25% tariffs, as well as any future tariffs that would be kind of sector specific. So on chemicals, on things like that, those are things the Trump administration is considering. Basically, if you do it by sector, the court says, or so far, there hasn't been a ruling saying that that's illegal. What's illegal was this across the board, everyone gets 10%. Um, Yet overnight we had this ruling from the appeals court saying that, okay, in the meantime, actually the tariffs will be collected while this ruling is going forward. Julian, how would you say that Brussels reacted to this? I mean, I would say there's cautious optimism. What do you think?
So this is running into the issue that, to be honest, even people who work on trade sometimes struggle to understand how trade functions, like in this US case. And it's in Brussels, it's people have kind of just become resigned to the fact that you're just going to have a lot of 180s in every direction when it comes to these tariff laws, right? Because, yeah, like you said, the US Trade Court blocked the majority of Trump's reciprocal tariffs. And the argument, based on something the Court of International Trade said, was that the US Constitution only gives Congress the authority to regulate commercial relationships with other states, and that these emergency powers that the presidents keep using or trying to use doesn't really actually give him the power to do what he thinks he does. But on the other side, I think it happened like 3 or 4 hours ago. The Federal Appeals Court temporarily reinstated all of the Trump tariffs, meaning they were back to where we were 24 hours ago. And the issue that we keep running into in Brussels, and this is the same for just about every sector and is causing all kinds of havoc, is that you don't actually know what they're doing in the US. I mean, like this is why the Trump reaction to the whole taco name, I can't remember what it actually stands for. Dave, you may remember what it is.
Uh, tr- hmm.
Let me
Trade
know. I'm gonna
off
just Google it.
chickening out? Trade
Uh, it,
tariffs off chicken out,
oh no,
something like that.
Trump always chickens out,
Trump always chicken out there, yeah.
and this is the thing that's really like kind of blocked into Brussels. Like I speak to people across most of the sectors and associations in Brussels, and pretty much everybody's position is like, "Oh, Trump had another idea again. That's nice." And then people just kind of explain what this could mean, and then tell everybody that you know what, we don't think this is actually going to stick out, and this isn't going to really go. And thank you, Shane, for correct mentioning this as well. But yeah, in Brussels, people are just like people are almost despondent because we don't actually know whether half of these are going to stick out,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
this
I
is
mean,
an
that
issue.
was certainly the reaction with this 50% tariff threat. It came late in the day on a Friday. I was kind of calling people up in Brussels, seeing how people were reacting, and everyone was just kind of like, "Yeah, I'm still going to enjoy my weekend." Like, I
Yeah.
couldn't find anybody really panicked about it because nobody was taking it seriously because he has backed off so many times now. It's kind of the president who cried wolf. The more he backs up, the less seriously people are going to take it.
Yeah.
However, my first reaction when I saw that press conference and he reacted so panicked about that taco thing, even
Yeah.
coming back to it later with the press, is that do we really want to poke the bear here? I mean, this now I think, well, what if he sees market reactions and he's like, I don't care, I will tank the entire U.S. economy just so people don't call me chicken.
No, I mean, I think that is a big issue. And there are now, since the journalists actually raised this and Trump basically had a meltdown live on international television, let's say, people are now trying to, well, people have found out who the journalist asking this question about the taco thing was. And I think the last I saw, someone made a Wikipedia page saying that he had triggered the 2026 recession.
Okay.
But it's one of these weird things where when you get these populist politicians who aren't particularly very bright and they don't technically have much emotional intellectual maturity, there is always the risk that they can just sort of Rochambeau their way through, creating several crises purely out of their own weird lack of healthy ego, right?
Mm.
And with Trump, I mean, okay, I'm saying this as a bit of an outsider to this, but I feel like with Trump that is possible. And even if there are checks and balances that can keep him in check on this, I mean, you'll be able to tell us more on this. Do you reckon that they'd actually be able to really hold him in line quickly enough? With the way that, for example, these appeals courts rulings can allow these tariffs to be put back in place and
I think the expectation in the US right now, and actually, like most Americans I'm talking to, seem to bring this up whenever we're talking about the situation of we are waiting for the constitutional crisis in which the Trump administration refuses to obey the courts.
yeah,
And it's coming, like it's almost 100% sure it's coming. We just don't know when and on what issue.
yeah,
Could this be the issue? We don't know. I think everyone's assumption has been it would be something about immigrants, about the migrants and with the visas or something like that. But at some point, it is clear that the Trump regime is going to defy the courts. And then the big question is, what do the courts do? As many people point out, courts don't have an army. Donald Trump has an army.
yeah,
This could be the thing, maybe. I mean, it depends. There are other legal avenues he can use here to go ahead with the quote unquote reciprocal tariffs by using different justifications. But the problem is, how much energy does he want to extend on this, especially when they've already seen the market reaction?
yeah,
Obviously, Peter Navarro is going to be pushing him to use whatever legal means he can find to push this through. But of course, we know that Republicans in the Congress, and I think plenty of people within the administration are very, very worried about the tariffs and about the market reaction. I also think that it's possible, were it not for that taco comment, that Trump might have been like, few with the courts, because then he can blame the courts, right? It's
mm,
not that he's a chicken. It's not that he backed off because he got scared about the market reaction. It's that the courts, once those big bad deep state courts won't let him help the American people as he promised. Uh, my first reaction was that he might secretly welcome this court ruling, but watching his reaction to that taco thing, I thought, oh no. Now he's going to think that if he doesn't stand up to the courts, defy the courts, then he will be called chicken. So that's inevitable constitutional crisis that could lead to
yeah.
all kinds of things in the most extreme cases. Um, it seems closer now than it did 2 days ago.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember all the stories about how they actually sent the USTR Lutnick, I think his name is, to a meeting on the other side of the White House when the first round of tariffs ended up being thrown out and then rescinded or like reduced. I can't remember what exactly happened. And you had several of the MAGA team running over to Trump to tell him, you need to cancel these right now because otherwise we're
Mhm.
in deep shit, right? And I agree that, to be honest, with the way Trump reacted to the taco thing, that may be a bit more difficult in future, to be fair. But
Yeah.
but it's even weirder when you think of all the things he keeps saying about the EU after the meetings with von der Leyen. The fact that with von der Leyen he says, "Oh, we had a great meeting, we get on so well," and then 2 days later he says, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically goes, "Fuck the EU. The EU's evil. These people need to be punished, etc., etc." Right? And I mean, I don't know. U.S.
It's
trade
very
policy
weird.
right
I
now.
mean, it does seem like we're back to the first term thing where he just
Yeah,
repeats whatever the last person he talked to says.
yeah,
Why he reacted so warmly to that phone call with von der Leyen, I think we'll never know. There was the first time they've really spoken. They had
yeah,
like this brief chat on the sidelines of the Pope's funeral, but actually until now, she was not able to get him on the phone. He was kind of refusing to have any engagement with the European Union. So was Marco
yeah,
Rubio, running away from his meeting with Kaya Kallas in DC. So maybe it was just his first meeting. She has a warm demeanor. I don't know. I think it may have been that he was just more looking for a way out before markets opened on the Monday,
yeah,
and the phone call gave him an opportunity to do that. Uh, and we saw the way he phrased it in the press conference in reaction to the taco thing, where he said, "Oh, and the EU demanded a call with me when I said the 50% thing." The EU has been asking for this phone call for 4 months. The difference is that he accepted the phone call.
yeah,
It's not like von der Leyen was saying, I won't talk to Donald Trump," and then she got spooked by the 50% threat and then called him. No, she's been trying to call him like every day for the past three
yeah.
months.
And it's not like the China situation where he was basically standing outside the Xi Jinping's window, throwing rocks at it and saying, "Please speak
Yeah,
to me."
yeah,
you know. But
yeah,
no, it's yeah. I mean, we're back to playground geopolitics,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah, it's certainly very tiresome, and
Oh
I
yeah,
think the longer the back and forth goes on. I mean, this is obviously going to affect the U.S. sovereign debt. It's going to affect bonds, and even if we just stay in this constant without a market crash, without global panic, even if we just stay as we've been in this kind of holding pattern of on again, off again, the damage to the U.S. economy and U.S. financial standing in the world is going to be rapid by the standards of human history, right? I mean, it was just in just a couple months of this, the dollar could no longer be the reserve currency. Like this is going to take its toll either way. But it kind of feels like we're looking at only two possible outcomes here: a global financial crash or a slow-ish couple months
yeah,
fading out of U.S. financial hegemony. But either way, it's going to be a major change, as was alluded to by Mark Carney in the speech he gave yesterday. We can talk about that maybe. Well, actually,
yeah,
let's talk about it now.
yeah.
I
Sure.
wanted to talk about this speech that President von der Leyen gave in Aachen in Germany yesterday when she was receiving the Charlemagne Prize. I think a lot of people had their eyebrows raised when she received this prize. I mean, these prizes are kind of nonsense anyway. They're more about the prize giver than the prize receiver. They want to give it to the most high profile person to make their award the most high profile that it can be. So, putting that aside, the legitimacy of these types of prizes, I thought her speech was very interesting. So she gave a
Mm,
speech when accepting the award yesterday, talking about how there needs to be a Pax Europaea to replace the Pax Americana. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly because the
yeah, yeah,
spelling
yeah.
is
No,
harmful to the
it's
eyes. Europaea, but the idea, obviously, Pax Americana came after World War II. It is a result of NATO and basically the Cold War standoff. That war became inconceivable in Europe because war would spark a nuclear war in the end of civilization. So the Pax Americana, brought material prosperity to Europe through the Marshall Plan. The European Union obviously played a role in that, although I think that can be exaggerated. I think that the main impetus behind Pax Americana was the clue is in the name. It was American superpower status, its protectorate over Europe. Um, no, it's funny when she used this term, Pax Europea. I never heard that term before, and I went to Wikipedia, and it exists and was used by some people to define the past 70 years in Europe. But again, that seems to be attributing too much credit to the European Union and Europe, and
Mm,
avoiding what it really was about, which was America. But von der Leyen was saying that the main push right now in Europe needs to be creating independence. The European Defense Commissioner came out with a pithier version of it afterwards, where he said, "Make Europe independent again," basically going to pre-World War II status, where European countries could be sovereign again and not
mm,
vassals of the United States. So I thought this was a really interesting speech. It seemed to me to get the gravity of the situation right for the very first time. I mean, von der Leyen has not been a profile in courage here, and she's not really, until yesterday, been willing to call out the United States for what's happening. She's not been willing to acknowledge Europe's real dependence on the United States and why that's a problem. She did
mm.
it yesterday. My worry is that, great, but clearly she didn't write that speech. So congratulations to von der Leyen's speechwriter for an excellent speech. The problem is, does von der Leyen herself, a arch Atlanticist, I mean, formerly in all these kind of Atlanticist organizations, does she really get it? Or is she just reading words on a page? My suspicion is that she's just reading words on a page. She
Yeah.
doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. What do you think?
So it's one of these odd things where I know one of her deputy chief of staffs, and he's a hardcore Macronist like me. So like really, well, Macron's former Europe advisor. So there's lots of Macronism leaking into this Pax Europea speech. But I mean, it's this really interesting thing where geopolitically you can say that the EU has had an outsized influence compared to its actual power right now,
Mhm.
because the EU has always been focused primarily on economic and regulatory power, or what you could call, qualitative power. Where with the Brussels effect, with the way in which the EU forces regulation onto companies that want to participate in what is, I think, if I remember the facts right, the single biggest market bloc in the world
Yeah.
and the single biggest consumer market in the world. The reality is that the EU has constantly been forcing countries around the world to really abide by European rules and regulations and other things, right? And I think that now that the game has kind of played out where von der Leyen tried to be the nice person while Macron was talking about the fact that Trump was abandoning research and reason by doing all of this visa cancellation, all this nonsense, and where they did all of this work to bring researchers, and they still are, to Europe. I think von der Leyen's realized that you can't really reason with Trump. You
Mhm.
can't really get much out of him because the guy is a loose cannon for all intents and purposes. And so what they're now doing is, I think that von der Leyen has basically gone straight balls to the walls and just decided that she really wants to push as aggressively as possible this not quite federalist and not quite strategic autonomy focused politics, but that she's leaning into the fact that Europe needs to become the sort of the bad boy on the block, right?
Mhm.
Where Europe needs to start becoming the great power that it can be and should be, and hopefully will be once we get this presidential election in Poland out of the way, which we can talk about later. And when we hopefully see Hungary switch leadership once Orban, if the polls hold out, gets voted out, and if he leaves. And I mean, as she said in the speech, like we're living in a world right now where we have imperial powers that are trying to tear everything apart. Whether you have Trump's weird far right nonsense where he's kind of just deporting people left, right, and center, banning free speech, banning people from coming, banning people from saying taco, which is ridiculous. You have Putin trying to basically desiccate Eastern Europe. You have China helping whoever they think will be useful, and you have all the nonsense happening in the Middle East and all the carnage over there. And Europe is in a place in the world today where we can't keep trying to be the nice guys. We can't keep trying to be diplomatic and say, "Hey guys, we're really like we disagree with you bombing civilians. We don't like you deporting people. We don't like you threatening everybody with nukes." Like no one cares, you know.
Yeah.
And I may
We're gravely
start,
concerned.
yeah, exactly. You know, the strongly worded letter that I always make fun of, and I'm
Mhm.
just like, what the fuck are you doing? But no, it's one of these things where, it's as Europeans, we need to kind of live up to what we actually are and can be, right? As Europeans, we need to become the guarantors of the European rules and freedoms and beliefs and the systems that have brought the world where it is now. Because for all intents and purposes, we can't rely on the post-Bretton Woods situation that created, Pax Americana, or not created because Pax Americana was technically around during World War I, but this US-dominated world where the US was the freedom police and they went around and kept challenging all of these authoritarian and dictatorial behaviors and the damage to human rights and everything. We can't rely on that anymore, and we need to be the ones who actually come forward and do this. We need to be the ones who actually remember that, for all intents and purposes, a lot of these ideas and these beliefs actually came out of Europe. And, at the risk of sounding like one of these weird, anonymous, far-right, white supremacist Twitter accounts that talks absolute shit about everything, we kind of need to remember our heritage and that we need to sort of defend this and bring this forward, right? Because, liberal democracy is a European invention.
Yeah.
Human rights is a European invention. We need to be fighting for these things. Let's go for it. Democracy is a European invention. Let's
Yep.
call a spade, and we need to really start pushing very hard on the fact that we are the ones who can fight for these. That we arguably in the EU institutions, and I mean, I'm probably going to get a lot of hassle about this on Monday when I start speaking to people again after this long weekend. But we with the EU institutions and the structures that we have, we are arguably one of the best placed and most resilient institutional systems that will actually allow us to defend these things, because we are not just one and done after an election that goes wrong where people vote for the far right. You know,
Yeah.
you still have the council, you still have the commission, you have the parliament, you have the member states. There's so many checks and balances,
Much more
which
than in the
argue
US, obviously.
much more than the US. I mean, could you imagine if we'd been living under an Orbanite hellscape for the last 20 years?
Yeah.
You know,
But you mentioned that you don't want to sound like these far right trolls online, but I think that really goes to the point of what von der Leyen's getting close to, but not quite getting there yet, which is that there is clearly a sense of something untapped from pro-Europeans, which is a sense of pride, giving Europeans back a sense of pride, not making them ashamed to be European, which is the way they've been made to feel, honestly, by
yeah,
centrist governments for 70 years, that Europe is less than, that America leads us, America does everything, America's so great at everything they do, and we're so shits and we're just embarrassed to be European. That is what centrist governments have been imparting on Europeans for 70 years. And it makes sense that Europeans don't want to be ashamed to be European. They shouldn't be ashamed to
yeah,
European. They should be proud of what this continent has achieved. Colonialism and imperialism was not the only thing that Europe did to this
yeah,
earth, as
100%.
awful as most aspects of it were. That there is a place for European pride, and that living under this vassal state, this military protectorate of the United States for the past decades has been greatly damaging to that sense of pride for Europeans. And so, I actually liked Kubilius, the defense commissioner, when he said, make Europe independent again. I don't like copying Donald Trump's phrases. I, of course, didn't like it when the Hungarian EU presidency just
Yeah,
copied it with that stupid make Europe great again. But make Europe independent again. MEIA. It again is really the key word here, because this was once a proud continent. And it's
yeah,
not, the globalists and whatever that State Department Substack thing that came out the other day. It's not, multiculturalism and equal rights for women and equal rights for gays, whatever, that has made this not a proud continent. It's American vassalage. It's that State Department that wrote that Substack. It's the fact that Europeans have not been proud of being European because they've allowed themselves to be ruled by America. That's nothing to do with this stupid culture war stuff. And that's what I think these centrist leaders like Macron, like von der Leyen, like Merz need to tap into. This kind of slightly aggressive European nationalism, but now based around the nation state. but based
Ah,
around the European Union. That's what we can tap into.
but there's one important distinction to make, and I'm going to tap into my inner Macronist because this is something that Macron took a lot of heat for back during, I think, it's the 2017 election campaign, where like, what he said is that people always when we start doing this, we're proud of being European thing. We're proud of our heritage, our history, and the things that we've contributed positively to the world, whilst also saying we've done bad things, like most countries. He got hit for being, an aggressively French, aggressively European nationalist, right? And Macron said something very interesting, where he made the distinction between patriotism, which is what ideally we really need in Europe, this pride about the things we've done, where we've come from, what we've contributed, and the fact that we've overcome the bad behavior and the, quite frankly, inhumane things that we've done at times in history, and nationalism, because we see more and more that nationalism is sort of the fallback line for a lot of these populists. Whether you're talking about Trump, whether you're talking about Fico, whether you're talking about Orban, Kaczynski, whatever. And there's this thing that we need to say, and I think this is really important to underline, is that nationalism in itself, if it was just, I'm proud of my country, I'm proud of the Union or whatever, that's fine. But the issue that we have with nationalism is that it's always in a negative comparison to another entity, you know? So we are always saying, oh, Europe is great because we're not like those backwards hicks in the US who can't figure out trade
Mhm.
policy, or, Europe is great because at least we developed all these interesting technologies and we actually got further than, Africa or Asia or whatever. Whereas what we need is a patriotism that's mostly just focused on we are proud of what we are and what we've done. We've conquered war and strife in our history, right? And we've done things that while other countries haven't done, or other states or other entities haven't done, we're also learning as much from them and the
Mhm.
creations they're producing and all the things they're putting together as, they have from us learning from the things that we've created, right?
For sure, but maybe I'm more pessimistic about human nature because I think you do need that external enemy to create. I mean, that's how nation states were created in Europe, always in opposite. I mean, most nation states in Europe didn't exist 200, 300 years ago, and they were created in opposition, usually to an occupying power. Most of these states were created by declaring their independence from another state. And that's why I kind of liked Kubilius's tweets because it gives us something to fight against. And maybe that's negative, and maybe, vilifying the United States is not so pretty, but I think that it maybe taps into a necessary part of human nature in order to create a state, in order to create a common identity. And that maybe the only way to create a common European identity is to talk about what we're not, that we're not Russian, that we're not American, that
Mm,
those looming threats from East and West actually threaten Europeans as a group, and that we do need to say bad things about those other places. And of course, European politicians are perfectly willing to say bad things about Russia. But what annoyed me about von der Leyen's speech is that she would not call out the United States by name, and that she's talking about these vague threats. Like, we all know who she's talking about, but she won't say it. And she's obviously following the lead of Merz. I mean, Merz being elected to
mm,
Germany and coming out so strongly against, let's say, not against the US, but calling a spade, let's say, when he's saying that Europe needs to be independent of the United States, and he names the United States. So she's cautiously following his lead, but she's not leading. She's not a leader. She's following Merz. Merz is willing to say the US by name. She's not. And that Mark Carney speech that I was referring to before, really excellent speech. I encourage people to look it up, where he's saying that basically the Pax Americana is over, this period of 70 years in which the US was leading the world and running all of our financial systems, and we all existed in this Bretton Woods system, is over. He said it's over, I think, three separate times, and saying Canada needs to strike out on its own, also saying that Canada needs to ally more closely with Europe than the United States. Carney isn't afraid to say the United States in this type of speech. Merz isn't afraid to say it. Von der Leyen, she's always like three steps behind. And as much as I like the language that she used yesterday, it's very hard to get excited about it A, because it's her, and she's not exactly a profile in courage, and B, because she's not really willing to actually say, she's scared, obviously. She doesn't want to say, mention Trump or the United States specifically because she's afraid that either Trump or the US State Department will go after her. So I don't know. Maybe it's a more negative view, but I do think you need to call out the enemy. And
No,
the
I
U.S.
agree.
isn't an enemy yet, but it could be. You need to call out at least the threat. The United States is a threat to Europe right now, and I think leaders need to come out and say it, right?
No, I agree. And I mean, I don't think anybody listening to us or who will listen to us has seen me not call out the threats to Europe on social media because, I mean, you know me, I'm a loudmouth. But I mean, on the von der Leyen point, yeah, I mean, she's also just a glorified civil servant, basically. Like, she answers to the council. And I think pretty much everybody knows it is that if the commission president goes rogue and the entirety of the council says, get back in your box, von der Leyen's going to climb back into it pretty quickly, right?
People always say that, but the thing is, if she wanted to, I mean, let's see what happens if the commission president actually decides to be a leader. I mean, the last real leader type person that we had as commission president was Delors. Delors went a lot further than the
Yeah.
council really was authorizing him to go, and look what he achieved. I mean, it's possible because there's a natural bully pulpit with the position of commission president, especially now that the position is much more high profile than it was,
Yeah.
say, 15 years ago. Uh, you know, you could say the same thing about the U.S. president that he's constrained by the Congress, but that's not how U.S. presidents have behaved over the past 60 years, right? The position is what you make it, and when you get somebody like von der
Yeah.
Leyen who's afraid to ruffle feathers, who's afraid to go against the council, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that it's a glorified civil servant and that she's accountable to the council. But I mean, on paper she could go a lot further, right?
I mean, it's one of the complicated things where she actually needs the support to do it, right? And this is the issue. And to be fair, I think von der Leyen herself, like, she's also quite nervous about the sort of the renewal of German leadership at the EU level, right, on the Merz. And I mean, admittedly, the Merz government is not off to the greatest start that we've ever seen in German history. But it's one of these things where it's very much there. And I mean, on the point of this calling out the enemies around us and the dangers we have. I mean, again, there's not a problem with that if we're taking this really pro-European patriotic view, right? Because the reality is that we know that they're enemies. We know that the Russians are planning to invade half of our continent. Like, we know this is the case. We know that Trump has said he's going to abandon us. Like, and they keep making these reports and they keep telling us things, and they keep moving the goalposts. And we do it, and I don't think it's particularly negative or, let's say, cynical to point that out. I mean, the point I was trying to make earlier is that a lot of these weirdos on the internet who keep trying to do this far right agitprop thing, who, funny enough, a lot of them actually turn out to be either in India or Dubai and basically just trying to rile up everybody for money, is that they're not necessarily talking about our enemies, but they're talking about a lot of random countries too. Like, you see a lot of them making comparisons to, Europe is better because we're not African.
Yeah.
Like, Europe is better because we're not Southeast Asian. Like, I think I saw one guy talk about Vietnam and like, at least we don't live amongst monkeys as defining cultural trait. All this
I mean, those
trashy
things are
shit, right?
obviously gross because those places aren't just threats to Europe.
Yeah,
It's really
exactly.
punching down, right? Those
Yeah,
same far right people are afraid to call out the United States. I mean,
exactly.
I never hear those far right trolls. Of course, they love the current U.S. government, but even
Yeah,
like when they would criticize Biden, they weren't criticizing like the U.S. hold over Europe. They don't even seem to be aware of it, or if they're aware of it, they love it. Uh, so it's like, yeah, it's this punching down thing, and it's clearly just
exactly.
driven by racism and
Yeah,
kind of gross white supremacist ideology that so many of them have.
yeah. And this is the issue with nationalism as a whole, because it takes a very reductive view of humanity, right? Whereas I think that the goal of focusing on a more patriotic view of these things, and again, it would be great if von der Leyen also took a leadership role in saying, we should be proud of being Europeans because of what we've achieved, not because we've achieved this compared to people who have not had it as easy in terms of environment, right? And this is one of these things that, to sort of try to put a bow on this whole thing, I think this is the role that the Commission President should be taking, alongside maybe picking more fights with Trump rather than hiding behind Merz,
Mm.
Callas when she was the prime minister or the president or whatever her title was, and Macron's coattails, right? Because I mean, we talked about this a few weeks back, where even on the European defense community discussions, nothing came out of the commission, right?
Yeah.
Like the defense commissioner just kind of came along for the ride with von der Leyen, and he was like, "Yeah, this is great, amazing." He wrote a nice letter saying, "I agree," and then went back to his office in
Yeah.
on
Well,
Schumann, right?
as
In
long as we
his
keep relying on the council to lead, to act, we'll never go anywhere. The council will never.
yeah,
It's a body of 27 people. It is never going to be able to lead. We need the commission president to lead,
yeah.
and unfortunately, with von der Leyen, he doesn't always do that. And speaking of far right nationalists, let's go on to our next topic so I can continue my criticism of von der Leyen, which is Budapest Pride. This whole issue about Budapest Pride.
Oh, it's
Um,
shameful
so
nonsense.
backing up here, Hungary has passed a law banning basically almost a carbon copy of the Russian law, which also banned gay
Yep.
pride parades. So it's basically saying you can't promote homosexuality in a public space. So that obviously outlaws pride parades. The Budapest Pride, which has been running for many years, is scheduled for June 28th. The Hungarian authorities look pretty set to enforce that law for this. As part of the law, it enables facial recognition
Yeah.
technology and cameras to identify the people participating in the illegal Pride March so that they can be charged and fined. Uh, so we've had two interesting developments this week. First, on Tuesday, 20 out of the 27 countries in the EU signed a letter calling on the Commission to strike back against this and condemning Hungary for this, specifically as a violation of Article 2 of the Treaties of the European Union, which is the EU's constitution, guaranteeing the respect for minority rights. They also said it's a threat to freedom of assembly if you're banning a protest march. And it's also a threat to privacy, right to privacy because of this facial recognition technology. Then on Wednesday, 60 MEPs wrote to the commission asking the commission to be visibly present at that parade because Your Active had reported earlier this week that von der Leyen has forbidden, or at least
Yeah.
asked, her College of Commissioners not to attend that Budapest Pride because, of course, they would risk arrest by being there. And that could obviously create well, the way Your Active reported it was that they are afraid of kind of provoking Orban on his home turf, that this would give credence to the argument that these far right nationalists make that the commission is trying to force everybody to be gay or whatever, and meddling in domestic affairs. The reality is the EU has really not been very on the forefront of this in terms of
Yeah.
policy actions. They're really letting member states do whatever they want in this area. But this is a talking point that the far right has, and that the commission is worried that they play into that by being there. What's your take on this? Do you think that the external pressure from the council and the parliament is going to make von der Leyen relent on this and at least allow a commissioner to attend that? And then what commissioner do we think would attend?
I mean, like it's this is one of the things why I sort of tear my hair out a bit, and it's really just aggravating how fucking weak we are on this really fundamental thing. Like we're talking about human rights, guys. Like okay, I'm gonna say potentially a very straight-coded thing in general, but it's just like why I don't understand why all of these weird tradcon Catholic douchebags have such a hate boner for gay people or trans people. Like, it doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, okay,
Well,
already,
I
like,
think their target right now is really the gender. I had an interesting exchange on Twitter where I was tweeting about this, and somebody who I don't know says they're a journalist in Brussels. I don't know who this person is, but said, "Well, gay prides are not protected. Well, pride parades are not protected under EU law." And because I was making the comparison to the Iron Curtain. So basically, the countries, as ever on these issues, it completely mirrors the Iron Curtain divide between former communist countries and former non-communist countries, with the exception of Italy. So every non-former communist country in Europe now has gay marriage except Italy. So
Yeah.
It's this complete Iron Curtain divide with Italy on the east side. And so I was saying that this recreated this, and this person said, well, pride parades didn't exist when the Iron Curtain existed. And I said, okay, the first pride parade in West Germany was 1979. First pride
Yeah.
parade in France was 1977. First in the UK was 1972. That's just clearly wrong.
It's basic
Uh,
history.
yeah, but he wrote back and said, no, 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 I mean LGBT pride.
Oh, fuck
So
off.
clearly, for a lot of these people, there is a distinction because it's no longer socially acceptable to say bad things about gay people. So what they
And
are
yet,
allowed to do, where it is socially acceptable, is to say bad things about transgender people, about gay
yeah,
people
of
having
course.
children. So they're just going around the issues. I mean, so much of this, all of this is about protecting children. So this Hungarian law is specifically saying that a pride parade is trying to indoctrinate children to be gay, and that's where you draw the line. And so no longer can the far right say that consenting adults being gay is bad. You even have gay far right leaders in Europe, several now, and
Yeah.
lots of gay far right voters. In fact, the informal poll of gay people in Germany found that most of them were voting for AFD in this past election.
Mm.
This is so much about the gender thing, about these areas where
Yeah.
it's still socially acceptable to be bigoted. And yeah, I mean, when I talk to gay people, gay men who are like, well, it's not about I agree with Hungary because the transgender stuff has gone too far. It's like, who do you think is next? Like, just because right now it's
Yeah.
not socially acceptable to criticize gay people, does not mean that like tomorrow, once they, get rid of the trans people, who do you think is next after that? So it does seem like this is very much targeting what is still socially acceptable to target.
Yeah, of course.
But
I
the,
mean,
the thing with the commission is they do all this kind of messaging on this topic on social media. They'll say Happy Pride, blah blah blah. They light up the Berlin Mall EU headquarters with the rainbow flag. But what have they actually done to help gay people in Eastern Europe, where there's still a lot of homophobia?
yeah, I mean, this is the thing, and I mean, I get entirely because all of it effectively comes down to bullying, right? It's the same shit that most of us saw in school, where you pick the weakest group of people and you just hammer them as hard as you can. And, it's even more ridiculous where you remember stories like that one Fidesz MEP, so an MEP from Viktor Orban's party, who escaped from a gay orgy during COVID by clambering down, a drain pipe and fell over and was arrested butt naked in the middle of Brussels, right? Like these people are such hypocrites in general. And let's be entirely honest. I mean, I grew up in the late '90s when you were getting a lot of education in English schools on gay rights, how gay communities function, the importance of being accepting towards people who have different sexual orientations. And I mean, last I checked, it didn't make me gay. It's like last I checked, watching RuPaul's Drag Race for several seasons did not make me trans or gay, for that matter, to be honest. It gave me better tips on how to do my hair, but aside from that, I never really got much further than that, right? And there's this weird obsession with these people who are so insecure and who are terminally online. And these people have an obsession with people that actually, in my opinion, don't actually exist, where they have this idea that trans people or drag queens or gay people do like drag queen story time and talk to children because they want to make your children gay. And I think a lot of this, and this is a bit of a conspiracy theory in general. I think a lot of this actually comes from websites like 4chan that had these weird Pizzagate
Yeah.
theories, where there was like this whole thing where the gays are coming for your children, and the gays are going to turn your dad into a transgender man. And I think there's also this weird. I mean, I've come across some weird shit in my time on the internet, but like, there's also this weird thing where a lot of these people want like a lot of these people have really weird pornographic obsessions, which include being dominated by gay people and trans people, which is just, good for you, but that doesn't mean that the politics is changing. And in terms of the commission, and especially von der Leyen, and I think this is a disgraceful failure of leadership from the commission, just about everybody involved, is that the fact that we are still kowtowing to this absolute shitbag, Viktor Orban, while he attacks gay people, attacks trans people, attacks minorities, attacks poor people, attacks women, everybody. And we just sit there saying, oh, maybe you don't turn up because you'll get arrested. No, 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 no. It's shameful. What we should be doing, and what we should have been doing this whole time, and this is why I love the fact that, Juncker just slapped him in the face at one point, is you need to be in constant confrontation with these people, because if you sit back even remotely, they'll just take the space. They will take the
Yeah.
space and they'll keep pushing. And, okay, this is my justification for staying on Twitter, for example, since it's been taken over by the far right, is that if you give them all the space to be
Mhm.
misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, racist, etc., they're just gonna keep doing it. Like, taking the high road is not a good idea with these people. You need to
Well,
be running them down
it's like
hard.
what I was saying before, though. I mean, it is human nature to want to define an enemy. And that's obviously what the far right is doing with
Yeah,
LGBT issues and this enemy within. And, the US State Department gave tacit endorsements, in my opinion, to the Pride ban on Tuesday when in the Substack post where they're talking about natural allies in Europe being Christian nations and specifically singling out Hungary for being attacked for being a Christian nation. I mean, we know what they're referring to there. And we know what JD Vance is referring to when he says the enemy within.
yeah, of
It
course.
is defining this enemy, which is, again, human nature. And I do think that on the side of liberal democracy, we shouldn't shy away from defining enemies who threaten us because they do threaten us and they're doing it to us. And so if we just sit back and say, no, 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 let's love everybody and let's, respect everybody's diverse viewpoints, and it's not going to work because that's not
Oh
human
yeah,
nature. Human
absolutely
nature
not.
needs an
Yeah,
adversary. And so I think that, yeah, we need to call these people out. We need to call these
yeah,
forces out. And yeah, I agree. Again, Ursula von der Leyen not really being a profile in courage, but what's new? Let's talk about the other thing that happened this week, which is the council. By the way, also for people watching, if you want to put in your questions there at the bottom, we'll get to those
yeah.
shortly. We should probably wrap up fairly soon. But this, yeah,
So you
this
can go to the beach.
right, yeah, the beach is calling me. But literally, actually, that's where I'm going to go. Uh, there was supposed to be a vote in the council on Tuesday on this issue of making three Spanish regional languages, Catalan, here where I am in Catalonia, Basque, and Galician, as
Yeah,
official languages of the EU. This is something that Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez promised in 2023 when he narrowly and surprisingly won the election here. But he needed the support of Catalan separatist parties in order to govern. And so he made this promise to them that he would ask for this at EU level. I wrote at the time that I thought he knew that this was not possible
yeah.
because the issue is this is a Pandora's box. There are plenty of other countries in the EU that have a lot of minority languages within the country. And if you open this up for these three Spanish languages, one of which is really considered a dialect of Portuguese, Galician, you're really opening up the box, the Pandora's box, for every regional language in Europe to want recognition. And that is logistically very difficult, but also incredibly expensive. I think
Oh
when
yeah.
I've talked to people on this issue, they think this is just some kind of nice symbolic gesture. No, when you make something in EU language, you have to get everything interpreted and translated into that language.
You need to
That's
pay
what
for
we're
a lot
now
of
doing
translators.
with, right. And it's millions and millions of euros to
Oh
the
yeah.
EU taxpayer. And that's what we're doing now with Irish. I have opinions on whether or not this was a good idea or not. But for decades, Irish was not registered as an official EU language. Now it is, only since a couple of years ago, and it costs all of us a lot of money to make those translations and interpretations into Irish. And it's Ireland's official national language, and so Ireland has every right to ask for it to be an official language. In the same way that Malta has had the right when they joined to register Maltese as an official language. So that's understandable. It's a national language. Okay. Interestingly, there are three EU countries that do not, two EU countries that still don't have their national language as a official EU language, which is Luxembourg, which has Luxembourgish as a national language. That's a dialect of German, so they wouldn't. There's no reason to
Yeah.
have that registered. They're nice enough not to ask for it. but also Cyprus, because technically Turkish is a national language of the Republic of Cyprus, the Greek part. But for obvious reasons, they have not asked for Turkish to become an EU official language. So it's also possible not to ask for this. But under the treaties, and this is what the Council of Legal Services said, you would have to actually change the treaty, they think, and I think it's a gray area, but they've concluded that most likely it's you're only able to ask for a language to become EU official if it's official at national level, not at regional
Mm,
level. The Spanish disagree with that. They're reading the treaties in a different way. But I think, and I wrote a Substack about this earlier this week, and I know this can be an unpopular opinion, but this is quite a serious thing we're talking about. And I think people accidentally think this is just like a nice gesture, but
yeah.
it's actually quite a big deal. What's your take on this regional language recognition?
I mean, I agree it's quite a big deal because, I mean, on one side, I definitely sympathize with these people. You know, like if, for example, French was not a recognized language at the EU level, you know, as comical as that would be, I would be in a similar position pushing for this. I think Pedro Sanchez did it again and pulled something out of his head that, you know, he knew this wasn't going to happen. He knew that he needed to get around Puigdemont's nonsense. He knew he needed Junts votes. So he sold them this, and this seems to have worked because apparently the guys from Junts, the Puigdemont's Catalan Independence Party, they basically said, okay, look, they actually made a real effort. We can't really be mad at them for making this effort, right? So, you know, politically, he's done what he needed to do and he's been saved. But yeah, I mean, so going back to the actual language issue, people don't know how much this shit costs.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, okay, I quickly Googled, like, you know, some cost on translation. Just for the parliament in 2006, it cost 128 million euros a year. And that was in 2006, right?
just for
Like
one
now,
institution.
just for one institution.
Yeah,
And there's four. Well, there's three that matter. There's a couple more that are on site, but you know, it's astronomical how much this costs. And look,
yeah.
I take quite a rare view on this, where I'm very much pro-European linguistic plurality because I like the fact that we can have all of these languages and it brings our natural cultures and we also speak other languages. I mean, I'm sure Dave could tell you, and other people that work with me can tell you that despite the fact that I speak fluent English, having grown up in South London, like, and despite my mannerisms being very Londoner, South London Croydonish, I have some very aggressively French ways of saying a lot of things. And this is part of the beauty of what we do. And, you know, even when I'm speaking in French, I'm bringing a bit of this London attitude and the linguistic style in general. And people don't necessarily understand how important this is. But on the other hand, there are so many dialects, there are so many languages in Europe that could theoretically become European languages, that in some ways you're almost, you know, undermining the EU by creating what the far right have called the Europe of Nations. We are taking every independent little region and creating you know, rightly reinforcing the unity at the cost of the unity of these nation states and indirectly the European Union. And it's a really weird tightrope to follow because, I mean, you know, there's a reason that some countries like France basically did everything they could to stamp out dialects and regional languages.
The most prolific murderer of languages in the modern history of Europe,
Oh
France.
yeah, I think they got rid of what, 100
A
dialects
lot.
and
Yeah,
regional languages. It
yeah.
was crazy over the
Occitan, the
course of
entire southern part of France did not speak French 200
yes.
years ago.
And they did this because the fact that there was a very clear understanding that, you know, having all of these languages would have made France even more ungovernable.
Mhm.
Could you imagine a France that speaks 150 languages? Absolute
Well,
chaos.
and we only have to look at Spain. I mean, Spain also tried to eradicate its regional languages and failed. And I think Spain is not exactly a country people would point to as a shining success of unification
Yeah.
these days. I think the thing is, you know, I'm very sympathetic to the Catalan cause. Spain, like
Yeah.
all European countries, is a made-up country that was made up in
Yeah,
1707 with
exactly.
the Nueva Planta decrees. However, these are the countries we ended up with. I like the Europe of the regions idea because, you know, again, these nation states are made up. But we have to organize the EU in some. And right now, the EU is organized around the nation states that we happened to end up with at
Yeah.
the end. of the Second World War or at the end of the Cold War for some of them. They are not, they don't exist in nature, these countries. A lot of them exist through brutal repression of minority languages, minority
Yeah,
culture, also, invasions of neighbors and this type of thing. But we are where we are. If Catalonia were to become an independent EU member state, of course, there's all kinds of Pandora's box problems with that. We know that
yeah,
other countries would likely veto that, even if they approved it at EU level, because they're afraid of their own secessionist movements, and then you could end up with this uncontrollable rolling secessionist movement across Europe. Uh, it's I like the idea of the Europe of the regions. It is maybe on its face a bit unfair that a language with 4 million native speakers, I think 8 million total speakers, Catalan, isn't represented at EU level. But you could point to a lot of other languages like Bavarian. 14 million people speak
yeah,
Bavarian at home, again considered a dialect of German, but the line between a dialect and a language can be very gray. You have Sardinian in Italy, which is completely considered by linguists a separate language from Italian. You have a lot of really large language speakers. And then even if I did some of the math for this subject I wrote earlier this week. Arabic, Russian, Turkish all have way, way, way more speakers in the European Union than Catalan. So if you want to start justifying this by the number of speakers, that's
yeah.
a slippery slope as well. So I think it's not a popular thing to say, and that's why, by the way, none of these countries are coming out strongly against this. That's why they keep kicking this into the long grass. Oh, we need more time. We need more time to study it. Like, no, I can tell you, when I talk to these other countries in private, they will never let this happen.
Oh yeah, of course.
But
And
none of them will say it publicly because it sounds like you're meddling with a domestic Spanish issue.
yeah, and I mean, we also need to remember that, in some ways, Europe Direct kind of fulfills this role to some extent of actually communicating EU documents and knowledge in local languages and dialects, right?
Mm.
Because as far as I'm aware, I mean, I'm just looking at the EU around me map that's on the Commission website or the Council website. If you look at it, there's a lot of like in Barcelona and Tarragona and Girona and all these areas. There's a lot of Europe Direct offices where if you go there, they will give you information on the EU and the latest publications on the EU in Catalan. But to some extent, this is still being done to help people out. It's just, and so in some ways, the EU languages are being put forward, and they're still getting information in their local language. I think it's just that when you bring that up to an institutional level, it's a whole other kettle of fish, right?
Yeah.
And again,
Well, I
if
mean,
you do that for Catalan, you have to do that for Breton. You have to do that for
language is
Corsican.
an incredibly emotional issue in Europe. I've
Yeah,
learned
of
that over the
course.
years. You have to tread lightly in this area because things to me that just seem like so logical are not considered that way by a lot of Europeans.
Yeah,
But I think utility and practicality does have a role here. So people have to be not afraid to kind of stand up for logic. And I'm just not sure I understand the logic of needing to translate EU directives into languages in which there is no unilingual speaker. There is no
yeah,
unilingual speaker of Irish. Every Irish speaker also speaks English. I believe that's also the case for Catalan, except maybe some very old people in the mountains or something.
yeah,
But yes, it's the native language, and maybe they prefer to read things in their native language. But how many people does this apply to that they need to read an EU directive in their native language of Catalan when they could read it in Spanish? Maybe this could apply to community. Well, this already applies. But there's already, I can tell you here in Barcelona, there's a EU office here for
yeah,
the EU office for Catalonia, where they have communication literature in Catalan.
yeah. In Catalan, yeah,
This already exists, I think, for the purposes for which a citizen would actually need.
yeah,
So why? Uh, I mean, one argument here is if Catalan MEPs would be able to speak in Catalan in the European Parliament when delivering an intervention with an interpretation booth. That would be an argument for this. However, I believe they can request this now. I
yeah.
could be
They
wrong about
can.
that, but they
Yeah,
can, right?
they
And that was
can.
the
They
case with
can. Yeah,
Irish. Before Irish became an official EU language a couple of years ago, Irish MEPs would occasionally read a scripted Irish script
yeah.
because I don't think there's ever been a native speaking Irish language MEP. But they would, read off a script and that would be translated. So it's possible now. There is no real utility for this. This is
Yeah,
symbolic, but spending millions of euros on something that's symbolic and just kind
hundreds
of
of millions,
hundreds
thousands
of
of
millions of
millions.
euros on
Yeah,
something that's just feeding national pride or regional
yeah,
pride in this case. I don't think I can get behind it. Um, by the
and I
way, I
mean,
should point out that Spain says that they're going to pay the cost of this. Everyone looking at this says actually we don't believe that they would continue paying this in the
yeah,
long term. And there's a very good possibility that a court would come in and say, no, that's not how it works. Translations are paid at EU level, and it would get scrapped down anyway. So
yeah,
that's the counterpoint. If anyone's out there saying, "Oh, but all the EU taxpayers wouldn't pay for this, just the Spanish taxpayers," people in the council don't think
yeah,
that's actually the case, but
yeah.
that's
And
even possible.
I mean, I think there's also a really important thing that you said earlier is who would read a European directive, and I think you could have just stopped at that point, to be honest, because
Yeah,
like
I mean, just
I've
lawyers and politicians are
yeah,
the only ones reading those. So why any
yeah,
lawyer here in Catalonia? I'm pretty sure they could read a legal text in Spanish. Like, I don't
or
think
even
that's going to be a
English, to
struggle.
be honest, you know.
Yeah, or in English. I mean, why don't we just
I
do everything
mean,
in English?
I mean,
Except for
look,
except for Joe.
I'm a fan of EU law, but I mean, even I'm not going looking for random things to read, you know. So I mean, but yeah, it's one of those odd things, and I mean, do we want to like broach the Eurovision thing as well at some point very quickly before
Oh,
we
I
finish
forgot
up?
about
Or
that. Let's leave that for another time.
yeah, for
We'll save
sure.
Eurovision for another topic, another time. Let's do one more before we wrap up, which is looking ahead to Sunday to Poland's election. Polls
Yes.
are really really tight. The polls for the polls. Every Polish
Yeah.
election, we got to make puns about this. So right now you have the nationalist right wing candidates supported by the Trump administration. You
Yeah.
had Christian Noem,
Nawrocki.
the Homeland Secretary in Poland, stumping for the far right candidates in Poland. I'm not sure why the Homeland Secretary is doing this, but
Yeah.
clearly you have the US government going full throttle in supporting the far right candidate for Poland's election. And then you have the Warsaw mayor of Donald Tusk's party, Civic Platform. They are basically neck and neck.
Yeah.
It is a real hold your breath moment for sure. Although I think it's worth pointing out for people maybe outside Europe who don't fully understand this, this the the importance of this is maybe being blown a little bit out of proportion because the president in Poland is a largely symbolic position.
Yeah.
It's the prime minister that is the leader of Poland, and that is Donald Tusk. It will continue to be Donald Tusk after this election on Sunday. The thing where presidents in European countries in parliamentary systems, France not being a parliamentary system, but most other European countries are. Parliamentary systems, the presidents have varying degrees of power.
Yeah.
Italy is one of the countries where they have more power, Germany, very little. Poland is kind of in the middle, where the president can veto legislation.
Yeah.
There's a very strong veto pen in Poland. So that's the worry there. But it's not like the PIS, or the far right party, is going to be imminently
Yeah.
coming back into power. They already hold the presidency de facto. I mean, it was nominally independent, but Duda was PIS. So basically, nothing changes.
Yeah.
If the far right candidate wins on Sunday, we're just keeping with the existing situation. Not great, but also not the end of the world. How do you expect things to go on Sunday?
I mean, to be honest, again, this is a bit like you said. This is like it's an election that matters for symbolic and
Mhm.
political reasons. But I mean, yeah, the president's a bit like the Irish president. Like he doesn't really do anything. He has opinions and goes on TV sometimes, and then kind of gives a New Year's Day announcement and a Christmas Day announcement or whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, so if I'm gonna butcher his name because Polish name's absolutely
You
thrown
notice
through
I
me,
didn't
but
try to say it.
Trzaskowski.
Sure, let's
Yeah,
go.
like Trzaskowski winning would be good because it would actually showcase that, the far right was losing its grip on an
Mhm.
important electorate in the EU and a big member of the EU and a member of the Weimar Triangle, which is a big military, alliance or like coordination group between France, Germany, and Poland. And it would show that, these far right leaders can be taken down, and it would
Yeah,
potentially give some decent momentum to the guys in Hungary who are going to bat against Orban, right?
yeah,
The problem is that even if Tchaikovsky loses, and Nawrocki somehow wins. And right now it's 50.5% to Tchaikovsky, who is the Tusk candidate, and 49.5 to Nawrocki. It's like, I mean, I can see the polling changing because the issue was that even though Tchaikovsky won by 1% during the first round, you still had the far right still had quite a lot of wind in their sails, right, with the other
Yeah,
parties.
yeah,
And we're back to that same old issue where, the messaging that is getting through into the cities where these people are like, well, we want these progressive movements. We want these movements that are a bit more pro-European. We want to be more global. It's running into the barrier that we're not really penetrating into the countryside with our messaging, right?
and that's
Because
happening
again,
everywhere. I mean, this
yeah,
urban-rural divide, it defines political conflict in like every Western country now.
yeah, and I mean, I'd even say it's global. Like this happened in Japan recently as well.
Yeah,
Like there was a Japanese far-right candidate in an election recently who basically only won votes outside of the cities. And there's this thing where we need to really start, and people are thinking of this, and it's sort of working where you look at the Europe Directs of the world, where you look at these initiatives to get engaged more with rural voters, with people who aren't necessarily city folk, and to sort of bridge the divide in countries like France between the Parisians and the rest of the country, or the Metropolitan and the people in the countryside. And I mean, whatever happens, I mean, the main lesson here is that we need to get our shit together because it's like that old meme that keeps floating around, and I'm probably going to put it somewhere in the Substack post I make on this, where you have one candidate who is like puppies and rainbows, and then you have the other candidate and it's like cholera, and the cholera is at like 49.6%, and you just have the like, who the fuck is voting for this guy, right?
uh,
And it's wild because we clearly have a lot of effort to make when it comes to education with media. I mean, I don't want to say media sanitation because it sounds a bit dictatorial, but there's a problem in the media sphere where you've got certain actors who are just doing the most random, illiberal and like illogical and fact-free things that penetrates in a lot of these cities, right? And we could see this in Hungary when Orban his party was pumping money into adverts in exclusively the countryside, right? Because he knew that he'd lost all the capital and the second biggest city. So he just went balls to the walls on the other smaller towns and villages. And this is I think in some senses, being repeated here where PIS are actually concentrating on the countryside once again.
that's always been their heartland too. I think it's
Yeah,
also important to point out that looking back, I've read that polls like a divided government. It's kind of the same thing that happens in the U.S. with the Congress and the president.
yeah,
So they actually like to. Usually, they will elect a president from the opposite party of the
yeah.
government, and so there's kind of an uphill battle being fought here by the centrists. That
Hmm.
basically, in normal times, they should lose. So I think actually, if they do win here, it is a very good sign for centrists. And I think not to like downplay expectations here, but I do think that if PIS wins, it's just kind of like what could be expected given the circumstance. I don't know. I won't personally feel so panicked about it, but I I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little too complacent. But
I mean, I don't think it's complacent. It's just, to be fair, as a French and an American living in Brussels, like, there's not much we can really do to influence the Polish elections, especially the countryside. Because, to be entirely honest, I don't think many of them are subscribing to us on Substack or on several other things, right?
if
Even
they
if they
are,
were,
let
I
us
don't think
know.
they
Let
don't.
us know in the comments.
Yeah, please do. But it's one of these things where, I mean, and I mean, to be fair, this is, I think, why both of us actually started our Substacks, is that we want to actually contribute to educating the public around us, right?
Mm.
And we want to contribute to the knowledge that's going on in the world. And if we keep doing this, we can hope that it actually reaches these people through like third, fourth, fifth branch connections. I mean, this famous thing where everybody's connected by five people, or within five people. I can't remember how it's phrased, but it's I mean, we just, as a society, as a European society, and even as a global society, we need to do more to educate people on this kind of thing because a lot of people don't understand how these things are going to impact their lives, right? And I think civic education is something that's still lacking in many countries, especially at the European level.
Yep, but that's for sure. Maybe we'll leave it there
Yeah.
on civic education. But thanks to everybody for watching. For those of you in the countries celebrating Ascension Day, which is a weird. Do you know in Spain this is not a holiday? Uh,
I find that
it's
weird.
so
I
I
find that so
finally got
weird.
an explanation for it because it's not a Catholic thing. Like for lots of Protestant countries, like Norway, Sweden, and Finland also have Ascension Day off. Wait, am I saying that right? Yeah, Ascension. I get
Yeah.
Ascension Day and Assumption Day confused. Uh, so it's this kind of weird mix of countries, but both Spain and Italy do not have this as a holiday. And apparently they used to, but in 1977, Italy got rid of 4 holidays because they thought there were too many holidays. And this was one of them. And then newly democratic Spain was like, oh, us too. And they got rid of it too, but not for any particular reason. I don't
Mhm.
know. So everyone's working very hard here in Barcelona. Not me. I'm going to go to the beach because I'm a Belgian citizen and it's Ascension Day for me. It's
Yeah.
Bridge Ascension Day today.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just gonna probably end up looking at polls for the next 2 hours. About polls going to the polls, you know.
Polls
So
going to the polls. Well, if you are in one of those countries, enjoy your long Ascension Day weekend. If you're not,
definitely.
enjoy your normal weekend. And hope everybody has a great weekend.
Yes, and thanks guys for listening in. Thanks to people who will listen in. And don't forget to subscribe to both Gulfstream Blues, Jesus Christ, and the French Dispatch. And we look forward to speaking to you guys again sometime soon.
All right. Take care, guys. Bye bye.
Ciao.